We're going to show you now how to make our inner border block. Both our inner and outer border blocks have strip sets in them. So let's get started and show you how we make that work. To make our test strip set, we're going to cut strips of fabric according to your directions, the required width. It can just be a short amount like this, and we will piece them together using a 1/4 inch seam. So here's our battleizer. To test our strip set, we've stitched just step 1 onto the battleizer with a contrasting thread. The diamond areas is where our strip set will ultimately end up. Here's the strip set. Just for this test, I've pressed the seam allowance toward the center. So what we'll do is we'll fold our test strip in half, and we'll lay it so that that rust area in the center aligns with the center triangle of our strip set. And the goal is to have the seam line on the strip set line up with the stitching line on the battleizer, which this does beautifully. If it didn't line up, we need to make some adjustments. Either adjust your seam allowance by moving your needle position, or possibly adjust your cutting. Everybody's sewing machine makes a slightly different 1/4 inch seam allowance. Everybody cuts slightly differently. So to make sure it all works out nice, do this test strip and you'll be much happier. After making sure your test strip set fits perfectly, refer to your instructions to see how many strips of each color you need to cut. Seam your strips together with your seam allowance that you've determined previously. Press your seams out from the center just like this, and then cross cut your strip sets. Refer to your instructions for the size that you need to cross cut them. We have 5 strip sets all cross cut and ready to go. We have our seam allowances pressed toward the outside, and we can just lay them out and we are ready to start stitching our block. To stitch our inner border block, you will need your battleizer. We've already got step 1 stitched on ours. You will also need your prepared strip sets. The fabrics you will need will be fabric 3 and fabric 4. Refer to your instructions for sizes and quantities. You will need thread A for your needle and bobbin, thread B for your needle and bobbin, thread C and thread D for your needle and your bobbin. You will also need wash-away thread and wonder tape. Here's our battleizer with our step 1 already stitched on it. We're now ready to take our first strip set to place it onto the battleizer to tack it down. So here's our first strip set. The seam between fabrics 2 and 3 need to align with the placement stitch on the battleizer. So line those up carefully, extending, make sure you extend for a seam allowance over the other placement stitch, keeping your seam between 2 and 3 aligned. You can turn it over to check out what's underneath. Make sure that seam is also aligned with your placement stitch. So once you have everything aligned, you may place it under the machine and the machine will stitch a tack down. So we're ready now to add our second strip set. Our first strip set is tacked down and ready to go. To help us out for the second one, we're going to take a piece of wonder tape and place it within the seam allowance of the first strip set. Peel away the paper backing. For placement purposes, lay your second strip set right side up, aligning the rust, what I call the rust diamonds in the center so you know where it goes. Then you're going to make sure your seam allowance are opposing, and they will be because of the way we press them. This will help lock it into place. Then place that second strip set on top of the first, sliding the second one to lock in with the first one. Our opposing seam allowances will help us do that. Make sure that you have your 1/4 inch seam allowance overhanging the placement stitch. Lock them into place and peel them back and check your placement, and you should have a perfect alignment. Once you're happy with the placement, you can put it under your sewing machine and allow the machine to stitch a seam. Here's our seam from step 3. And you can see when I turn it back that we do have a beautifully matched seam line. So the next step is the tack down for step 4. We need to make sure that the seam line aligns with the placement stitch on the battleizer. To help us do that, we're going to cut another small piece of wonder tape. We will turn the fabric back and place the wonder tape right over that seam line that we need to match up. When we flip our fabric right side up, again we will make sure the seam line between fabrics 2 and 3 align with the placement stitch on the battleizer. Now we're ready to stitch our tack down. Here's our tack down from step 4. We're now ready to place our next strip set, so we'll put a piece of wonder tape in the seam allowance. Take our next strip set, make sure we align the diamonds in the center, place it right side to the last strip set, locking in your seam allowance as we've done in the previous step, keeping your 1/4 inch seam allowance extended over the stitching line. Once you get it locked into place, you are now ready to put it on the machine and stitch step 5. Here's our seam from step 5. When we fold it over and check out our seam, once again we have a beautifully aligned seam allowance. So now we need to tack this down. To help us out with the placement, we'll put another piece of wonder tape underneath the strip set, peel away the paper backing, and then when you finger press over your strip set again, align the seam between fabrics 2 and 3 to line up with the placement stitch on the battleizer. When you're happy with the placement, go ahead and put it under the machine, and the machine will stitch a tack down. Here's our tack down from step 6. We're now ready to place another strip set. Again, we'll use our wonder tape between fabrics 2 and 3. We'll place our strip set right side to the last, extending your seam allowance a 1/4 inch past the placement line. Lock in your seam allowances once again. You can of course check to be sure you're aligned properly. And once you're happy with your alignment, place it under the machine and stitch step 7, which will be the seam. So here's our seam from step 7, and once again we have a beautifully aligned seam. Everything matches up. So now we're going to add another piece of wonder tape underneath the last strip set to help us hold it in place for the tack down. So we'll place it under there, remove the paper backing, and when we finger press over our strip set, again we'll make sure that our seam line between fabrics 2 and 3 align with the placement stitch on the battleizer, and then we'll place it under the machine and stitch step 8, which is a tack down. Here's our tack down from step 8. We're ready to place our very last strip set for this particular block. Another piece of wonder tape between fabrics 2 and 3 within the seam allowance. Place your strip set so that your diamonds are aligned in the correct place, right sides together, extending your seam allowance a 1/4 inch, and lock your seams in place. Finger press it onto your Wonder Tape and you will stitch the last seam. Here's our seam from step 9. So we're ready to do our last tack down stitch, which would be step 10. And to help with the placement, we're going to put another piece of Wonder Tape under there, because it's important that that seam remains straight so that our quilting will line up perfectly. So with the Wonder Tape under there, we'll turn it back right side up and just make sure our seam on the strip set aligns with the placement stitch on the battleizer. Pressing it in place carefully, and then we'll do our last tack down stitch. So this is step 10, our last tack down stitch from our strip sets. We're now ready to trim away the points at the top and bottom of our strip set. I'm going to start by beginning to trim away the points on the top. I'm using our new mini hoop scissors to do this. You can also use your regular hoop scissors. So once those points are trimmed away, I've left about a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. We'll take our wider strip of fabric 3 and place it right side to the strip set, raw edges even, and we'll place it back under the machine and stitch the seam. So here's fabric 3 seam. We're going to flip it right side up and smooth it up and out of the way. Then we need to trim the points from the bottom. Again, we're going to leave a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. After we get that trimmed, then we'll place fabric 4 right side to the strip sets, raw edges even, and we will place this under the machine and stitch the seam. So we'll flip fabric 4 right side up and smooth out. For step 13, we're going to place water-soluble thread in the needle only, and we're going to stitch the tack down. Step 14, I've placed the block back on the back of this hoop. I still have water-soluble thread in my machine, and we'll let the machine stitch the tack down to attach the block back. Step 15, place thread B in the needle and the bobbin and stitch the decorative stitches. Step 16, place thread D in the needle and the bobbin and stitch the beautifully digitized quilting by Master Quilter Sharon Schomburg. Place thread C in the needle and the bobbin for step 17 and stitch more beautiful quilting by Sharon Schomburg. For the final step of our inner border block, place thread A in the needle and the bobbin and stitch the last of the gorgeous quilting by Sharon Schomburg. So here's a look at our completed inner border block. As you can see, with careful planning and alignment of your strip sets, you can get your quilting to align beautifully within the piece sections. So I'm trimming up the block, getting it ready to take out of the hoop, and we hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you will take our tips to heart and make yourself some inner border blocks to go around your Jacobean Journey quilt.